The Psychology of Money. Chapter 20, Confessions. Sandy Gottsman, a billionaire investor who founded the consulting group First Manhattan, is said to ask one question when interviewing candidates for his investment team: what do you own, and why? Not, what stocks do you think are cheap, or what economy is about to have a recession? Just show me what you do with your own money. I love this question because it highlights what can often be a mile-wide gap between what makes sense, which is what people suggest you do, and what feels right to them, which is what they actually do. Half of all US mutual fund portfolio managers do not invest a cent of their own money in their funds, according to Morningstar. This might seem atrocious, and surely the statistic uncovers some hypocrisy. But this kind of stuff is more common than you'd think. Ken Murray, a professor of medicine at USC, wrote an essay in 2011 titled How Doctors Die that showed the degree to which doctors choose different end-of-life treatments for themselves than they recommend for their patients. Doctors don't die like the rest of us, he wrote. What's unusual about them is not how much treatment they get compared to most Americans, but how little. For all the time they spend fending off the deaths of others, they tend to be fairly serene when faced with death themselves. They know exactly what is going to happen, they know the choices, and they generally have access to any sort of medical care they could want. But they go gently. A doctor may throw the kitchen sink at her patient's cancer, but choose palliative care for herself. The difference between what someone suggests you do and what they do for themselves isn't always a bad thing. It just underscores that when dealing with complicated and emotional issues that affect you and your family, there is no one right answer. There is no universal truth. There's only what works for you and your family, checking the boxes you want checked in a way that leaves you comfortable and sleeping well at night. There are basic principles that must be adhered to. This is true in finance and in medicine, but important financial decisions are not made in spreadsheets or in textbooks. They are made at the dinner table. They often aren't made with the intention of maximizing returns, but minimizing the chance of disappointing a spouse or child. Those kinds of things are difficult to summarize in charts or formulas, and they vary widely from person to person. What works for one person may not work for another. You have to find what works for you. Here's what works for me. How my family thinks about savings. Charlie Munger once said, I did not intend to get rich. I just wanted to get independent. We can leave aside rich, but independence has always been my personal financial goal. Chasing the highest returns or leveraging my assets to live the most luxurious life has little interest to me. Both look like games people do to impress their friends, and both have hidden risks. I mostly just want to wake up every day knowing my family and I can do whatever we want to do on our own terms. Every financial decision we make revolves around that goal. My parents lived their adult years in two stages: dirt poor and moderately well off. My father became a doctor when he was 40 and already had 3 kids. Earning a doctor's salary did not offset the frugal mentality that is forced when supporting 3 hungry kids while in medical school, and my parents spent the good years living well below their means with a high savings rate. This gave them a degree of independence. My father was an emergency room doctor, one of the highest stress professions I can imagine and one that requires a painful toggling of circadian rhythms between night and day shifts. After 2 decades he decided he'd had enough, so he stopped. Just quit. Moved on to the next phase of his life. That stuck with me. Being able to wake up one morning and change what you're doing, on your own terms, whenever you're ready, seems like the grandmother of all financial goals. Independence, to me, doesn't mean you'll stop working. It means you only do the work you like with people you like at the times you want for as long as you want. And achieving some level of independence does not rely on earning a doctor's income. It's mostly a matter of keeping your expectations in check and living below your means. Independence, at any income level, is driven by your savings rate. And past a certain level of income, your savings rate is driven by your ability to keep your lifestyle expectations from running away. My wife and I met in college and moved in with each other years before we got married. After school, we both had entry-level jobs with entry-level pay and settled into a moderate lifestyle. All lifestyles exist on a spectrum, and what is decent to one person can feel like royalty or poverty to another. But at our incomes, we got what we considered a decent apartment, a decent car, decent clothes, decent food. Comfortable, but nothing close to fancy. Despite more than a decade of rising incomes, myself in finance, my wife in healthcare, we've more or less stayed at that lifestyle ever since. That's pushed our savings rate continuously higher. Virtually every dollar of raise has accrued to savings, our independence fund. We now live considerably below our means, which tells you little about our income and more about our decision to maintain a lifestyle that we established in our 20s. If there's a part of our household financial plan I'm proud of, it's that we got the goalpost of lifestyle desires to stop moving at a young age. Our savings rate is fairly high, but we rarely feel like we are repressively frugal because our aspirations for more stuff haven't moved much. It's not that our aspirations are non-existent, we like nice stuff and live comfortably. We just got the goalpost to stop moving. This would not work for everyone, and it only works for us because we both agree to it equally. Neither of us are compromising for the other. Most of what we get pleasure from, going for walks, reading, podcasts, costs little, so we rarely feel like we're missing out. On the rare occasion when I question our savings rate, I think of the independence my parents earned from years of high savings, and I quickly come back. Independence is our top goal. A secondary benefit of maintaining a lifestyle below what you can afford is avoiding the psychological treadmill of keeping up with the Joneses. Comfortably living below what you can afford, without much desire for more, removes a tremendous amount of social pressure that many people in the modern first world subject themselves to. Nassim Taleb explained, true success is exiting some rat race to modulate one's activities for peace of mind. I like that. We're so committed to financial independence that we've made decisions which don't make sense on paper. For example, we own our house without a mortgage. Financially, it's the worst decision we've ever made, but emotionally, it's the best. Mortgage rates were extremely low when we bought our house. Any advisor would recommend taking a cheap loan and investing the extra money in higher return assets like stocks. But our goal was never to be perfectly rational. Our goal is to be psychologically comfortable. The independence I feel from owning our home outright is worth more than the extra money we might have earned through investing. Eliminating a monthly payment gives us peace of mind. It makes us feel free. I don't try to defend this choice to anyone. On paper, it's not logical. But it works for us, and we like it. Sometimes you must choose between being right and being happy. We also keep more cash than most financial experts would recommend, around 20% of our assets, excluding the house. This also doesn't look good on paper, and I'm not suggesting others do the same. But it works for us. We do it because cash is the oxygen of independence, and we never want to be forced to sell our stocks in an emergency. Maybe we just have a lower risk tolerance than others. But everything I've learned about personal finance tells me that everyone, without exception, will eventually face a huge expense they did not expect and they don't plan for. These expenses specifically because they did not expect them. The few people who know the details of our finances ask, what are you saving for? A house? A boat? A new car? No, none of those. I'm saving for a world where curveballs are more common than we expect. Not being forced to sell stocks to cover an expense also means we're increasing the odds of letting the stocks we own compound for the longest period of time. Charlie Munger put it well, the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. How my family thinks about investing. I started my career as a stock picker. At the time we only own individual stocks, mostly large companies like Berkshire Hathaway and Procter & Gamble, mixed with smaller stocks I considered deep value investments. Go back to my 20s and at any given point I held something like 25 individual stocks. I don't know how I did as a stock picker. Did I beat the market? I'm not sure. Like most who try, I didn't keep a good score. Either way, I've shifted my views and now every stock we own is a low-cost index fund. I don't have anything against actively picking stocks either, on your own or through giving your money to an active fund manager. I think some people can outperform the market averages. It's just very hard, and harder than most people think. If I had to summarize my views on investing, it's this: every investor should pick a strategy that has the highest odds of successfully meeting their goals. And I think for most investors, dollar-cost averaging into a low-cost index fund will provide the highest odds of long-term success. That doesn't mean index investing will always work. It's not for everyone. And it doesn't mean active stock picking is guaranteed to fail. The finance world has become too extreme. One side fully supports index funds, while the other fully rejects active investing. In reality, beating the market should be difficult. The odds should be low. If it were easy, everyone would do it, and then the opportunity would disappear. So it's no surprise that most active managers don't outperform. In fact, 85% of large-cap active managers failed to beat the S&P 500 in the decade ending 2019. Still, I know people who think trying to beat the market is crazy, yet push their kids to become professional athletes. Everyone looks at odds differently. Life is about choosing which risks you're willing to take. Over time, I realized that our family has a high chance of meeting every financial goal simply by investing consistently in low-cost index funds for decades and letting compounding do its job. A lot of this confidence comes from our frugal lifestyle. If we can reach our goals without taking the additional risk of trying to outperform the market, then why even try? I don't need to be the best investor, but I definitely cannot afford to be a bad one. Thinking this way makes index investing the obvious choice for us. Not everyone will agree with this, especially my friends whose jobs depend on beating the market. I respect their work. But this system works for our family. We invest from every paycheck into index funds, both US and international stocks. There's no fixed target. We simply invest whatever is left after spending. We also max out our retirement accounts and contribute to our kids' 529 college savings plans. And that's really it. Our entire net worth is basically three things: a house, a checking account, and a few Vanguard index funds. It doesn't need to be more complicated for us. I prefer simple. One of my strongest investing beliefs is that there's almost no correlation between how hard you work at investing and the results you get. The world runs on tails. A small number of variables create most of the returns. If you miss those few big things, effort won't save you. And if you capture them, even a simple strategy can perform extremely well. My strategy doesn't depend on picking the right sector or predicting the next recession. It depends on three things: a high savings rate, patience, optimism that the global economy will grow in the coming decades. Almost all my investing energy goes into the first two because those I can control. I've changed my investment strategy before, so it's possible I'll change it again. But no matter what, our core goal will always be independence, and we'll always choose whatever helps us sleep peacefully at night. For us, that's the ultimate goal, the real mastery of the psychology of money. But everyone is different. No one is crazy.